Okay, this is a discussion of Chapter 2, Culture-Bound Syndromes Unbound. Make sure you have your textbook handy. Chapter 2, we're going to be reading some passages from time to time. And on your syllabus, this is actually reading 4, Han Chapter 2, Culture-Bound Syndromes Unbound. Alright, so let's I'm going to do one part of the discussion here, and then I'll stop it and we'll finish it. So right now I anticipate this thing being 2 parts. I might add a part or two. Also, to go along with this, you will want to go to Moodle and download and print out the 3 models for the understanding of culture-bound syndromes. It's a little Word document, but you're going to find that pretty useful, and I'll get to that probably in the second part. Alright, so let's begin at the beginning here. First of all, no sickness is strictly culture-bound. Now, one of the models is going to disagree with that, but I agree with Han in that particular model is probably not correct, and that would be the exclusionist model. We'll talk more about that later. Anyway, the reason why no sickness is strictly culture bound is because there are components to all sickness that are both cultural and universal. Universal meaning biological, by virtue of the fact that we're all Homo sapiens, members of the same genus and species. We react to the same pathogens in the same way, etc. So, there is a physiological basis, a biological and genetic basis, etc., that we share with everyone, which makes us susceptible to pathogens in the same way. So that's where you get the universal commonality. The difference from place to place comes in when we start thinking about the way people are thinking of these illnesses and these pathogens, etc. In some places they may emphasize them, in some places they may ignore them, in some places they'll bring in various aspects of religion to understand them, etc. So while the same thing may be happening on the physiological, biological level, culturally it may appear to be different. And that's pretty much how we get to the issue of culture-bound syndromes. Another basic point, that the more cultural specific the details of a particular syndrome, the more likely we are to label it culture-bound. So when you get into, for example, KORO, K-O-R-O, the shrinking penis disease, the descriptions of that will be very, very cultural, although it's clear that something similar psychologically is happening around the world. In some places they sort of couch it in terms that are very cultural specific, and so therefore the more likely we are to see that malady as a culture-bound issue or a culture-bound syndrome. Alright, on page 43 of your textbook, the discussion begins there and goes to page 44. There's a sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 step model regarding precisely how a culture-bound syndrome originates. So here are the steps. First, an observer, usually an outsider, a Western observer, will visit some foreign setting that of course is culturally very different, geographically very different from their home setting. So that's the first thing. We have a foreigner in an exotic setting. Excuse me. All right, number two, this observer, this outsider, will notice something strange and abnormal going on behaviorally. Now, this is in comparison to his or her own understanding of human cultural behavior. Be that as it may, they will see something sort of strange, something anomalous, something very different going on. Okay, third step. Of course, the outsider will question the natives regarding precisely what's going on. And of course, the natives, the insiders, will describe the malady or the sickness in cultural terms. In other words, in terms that are familiar to them. Fourth step, the observer will announce the discovery of an exotic new culture-bound syndrome that they've stumbled upon in this one particular place. So here it's moved from a very cultural specific setting to a more universal setting, at least conceptually, now that the outsider has announced the presence of this malady to the world. Number five, invariably this outsider will then write about this malady or present this malady at perhaps a conference somewhere. And so in the process of presenting this new knowledge, of course, the researcher, we could call him or her, will have to speak in terms that are more universally palatable, because after all, he's going to have to communicate. He or she's going to have to communicate this information in a way that a universal audience can understand it. So, in the process, the malady is going to lose some of its cultural specificity. And then finally, other researchers, once they become aware of this so-called culture-bound syndrome, they begin to see similarities between other issues around the world, other maladies around the world, and this new culture-bound syndrome. And so what happens is that what was originally a culture-bound syndrome begins to sort of transcend or cross cultural boundaries, and it loses its culture-bound syndrome designation. Now, once again, on page 43 and 44, you will get a summary of the basic points I've just made. Okay, well, I'm going to end this first part here, and we're going to pick it up in part two with the three models. So make sure you have that little handout available.